The chapel bells were still ringing when I fled. My wedding dress caught on the rose thorns as I stumbled through the garden behind St. Catherine's, white silk tearing like paper in my desperate hands. The sound of my name being called echoed from the chapel steps, but I couldn't stop. Not when my lungs were finally filling with air that didn't taste like lies. Elena, Elena, where are you going? My sister's voice cut through the humid Charleston air, sharp with panic. I pressed myself against the old oak tree, its bark rough against my exposed shoulders. The bodice of my dress felt like a cage, each breath a rebellion against the life I was supposed to accept. Through the Spanish moss, I could see the guests spilling onto the lawn. My mother stood at the center, her face a mask of mortification as she gestured wildly to the groomsmen. Somewhere in that crowd was David, the man I'd just left at the altar, the man my father had chosen for me. The man whose kiss felt like drowning. I kicked off my heels and ran barefoot across the cobblestones, my veil floating behind me like a ghost. The old cemetery stretched ahead, weathered headstones casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. I'd played here as a child, hiding among the monuments when the world became too much. It seemed fitting to seek refuge here again, but as I rounded the corner of the mausoleum, I stopped short. A black car waited in the shadows, engine purring softly. The passenger door hung open like an invitation, and behind the wheel sat a man I hadn't seen in 5 years, yet recognized in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Victor Hale. His dark hair was longer now, touching his collar. His jaw more defined, carved by years and whatever storms had shaped him since he'd vanished from my life. But his eyes were the same stormy gray that had haunted my dreams. Same eyes that had watched me from across crowded rooms when I was 17 and he was my brother's best friend. "Get in," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered, rougher around the edges. I should have asked questions, should have demanded explanations, should have wondered how he knew I'd be here, how he'd found me in this moment of complete collapse. Instead, I gathered my ruined dress and slipped into the passenger seat. The door closed with a soft click, sealing us inside the cocoon of leather and cedar cologne that smelled exactly like the memory I'd tried to bury. He didn't speak as he pulled away from the chapel, didn't ask why I'd run or where I wanted to go. He simply drove, taking us deeper into the low country, where the roads narrowed and the world grew quiet. "Why were you there?" I finally whispered, my voice hoarse from running. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I heard about the wedding. That's not an answer." He glanced at me then, just for a moment, and I saw something raw in his expression. Something that made my chest tighten with a feeling I'd spent years trying to forget. "I couldn't let you marry him," he said simply. The Spanish moss parted like curtains as we drove deeper into the marsh, the salt air mixing with the scent of jasmine and secrets. In the distance, I could see a house emerging from the trees, all dark wood and wide porches, isolated and beautiful. "Where are we going?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Somewhere you can breathe," he said. As we pulled into the circular drive, I realized I was still wearing my engagement ring. The diamond caught the light streaming through the windshield, a sharp reminder of the life I'd just abandoned. Without thinking, I slipped it off and let it fall to the car floor. Victor noticed. He always noticed everything. "No regrets?" he asked as he turned off the engine. I looked at the house, then at him. At the man who'd disappeared when I needed him most and returned when I'd finally found the courage to save myself. "Not yet," I said. But as he came around to open my door, as his hand brushed mine when he helped me out, I wondered if I was trading one kind of trap for another. Because the way Victor looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous all at once made me forget why I'd been running in the first place. It made me want to run towards something instead of away from it, and that terrified me more than any wedding ever could. The house breathed around us as Victor led me through rooms that felt both foreign and familiar. Everything was rich mahogany and soft light, the kind of masculine elegance that whispered of old money and older secrets. My bare feet were silent. On the hardwood floors, my wedding dress a ghostly trail behind me. "There's a room upstairs," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Clean clothes?" "Whatever you need." I wanted to ask him how long he'd been planning this, how he'd known I would need rescuing. But the questions felt too heavy for the fragile peace settling between us. Instead, I followed him up the curved staircase, my fingers trailing along the smooth banister. At the top, he opened a door to reveal a bedroom bathed in golden afternoon light. A white cotton shirt lay folded on the bed, clearly his, clearly meant for me. "I'll be downstairs," he said, already turning away. "Victor." He stopped, his hand on the doorframe, but didn't turn around. "Thank you," I whispered. His shoulders tensed. "Don't thank me yet, Elena. You don't know what you've walked into." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the weight of his words and the sound of my own racing heart. I peeled out of the wedding dress slowly, each layer falling away like skin I'd outgrown. The corset had left red marks across my ribs, and I traced them with wondering fingers. Evidence of the life I'd almost accepted. The cage I'd almost locked myself inside. Victor's shirt fell to mid-thigh, soft cotton that smelled like cedar and rain. In the mirror, I looked like a different person, smaller somehow, but not diminished. Freed. When I found him in the kitchen, he was standing at the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The late sunlight caught the gold in his dark hair. And for a moment, he looked exactly like the boy I'd fallen in love with when I was too young to understand what love could cost. "Better?" he asked, without turning around. "Different," I said, moving to stand beside him. "How long have you had this place?" 3 years. He took a slow sip. "I needed somewhere to disappear." "From what?" No, he did look at me, and the pain in his eyes was so raw I had to look away. "From wanting things I couldn't have?" The words hung between us like a confession, and I felt something dangerous unfurl in my chest. Something that had been sleeping for 5 years, waiting for his voice to wake it up. "You left," I said, the accusation slipping out before I could stop it. "The summer before my senior year, you just vanished." His jaw tightened. "I had to." "Why?" "You were 18 and looking at me like I hung the moon, and I was 23 and stupid enough to think I could resist you forever." He set down his glass with more force than necessary. "Because your brother trusted me, and your father would have destroyed both our families if he'd known what I was thinking every time you walked into a room." My breath caught. "What were you thinking?" He turned to face me fully then, and the heat in his eyes made my knees weak. "That I wanted to kiss you until you forgot your own name. That I wanted to take you away from all their plans and expectations, and show you what it felt like to choose something for yourself. Victor, I was in love with you, Elena." The words came out rough, like they'd been scraping against his throat for years. "I've been in love with you since you were 17 years. Old and stole my lighter just to have an excuse to talk to me. And when I realized what that meant, what it could do to you, I ran." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of my breathing, too fast and too shallow. Outside the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. "You should have told me," I whispered. "You were a child." "I wasn't. Not really." I stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of green in his gray eyes. I knew what I felt. I knew what I wanted. And what was that? "You," the word came out like a prayer, like a secret I'd been keeping even from myself. It was always, "you." Something shifted in his expression, a wall crumbling. But then he shook his head, backing away. "You don't understand. Your father, David's family, they're not going to just let this go. It's running away from your wedding, disappearing with me. They'll paint you as hysterical, damaged. They'll say, I corrupted you, took advantage. Let them say it." "Elena, no." I followed him, my bare feet slapping against the tile. "I spent my whole life being what other people wanted me to be. The perfect daughter, the perfect fiancé. Almost married a man I didn't love because it was expected, because it was safe. But I've never felt safe, Victor. Not until right now, in this kitchen, with you looking at me like I'm something worth saving." He stopped retreating, his back against the counter. I could see his pulse jumping at his throat, could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then show me." For a moment, we just stared at each other. The air between us crackled with 5 years of suppressed longing, with all the words we'd never said and all the touches we'd never allowed ourselves. Then his control snapped. He reached for me, his hands framing my face as he kissed me with the desperation of a drowning man. I melted into him, my fingers fisting. In his shirt, tasting whiskey and want and the salt of tears. I hadn't realized I was crying when we broke apart. Both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. "There's no going back from this," he warned. "Good," I whispered against his lips. "I never want to go back to who I was before." But even as I said it, even as I lost myself in the warmth of his arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing at the edge of a precipice. That choosing him, choosing this, would cost us both more than we could imagine. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway made us both freeze. Victor's eyes went hard. "Oh, dangerous. Stay here." But I was already moving to the window, peering. Through the curtains at the black sedan pulling up to the house, my blood turned to ice when I recognized the man stepping out of the passenger seat. My father. And he wasn't alone. "Elena, step away from the window." Victor's voice was steel-wrapped in silk, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the sight of my father striding across the gravel with David and two other men I recognized as family lawyers. "How did they find us?" I whispered. "Does it matter?" Victor was already moving, checking the locks on the doors, pulling curtains closed. "What matters is what they want." The knock came hard and insistent, rattling the front door in its frame. My father's voice boomed through the wood. "Elena, I know you're in there. Come out, and we can discuss this like rational adults." "Rational," I repeated, hysteria bubbling up in my throat. "There's nothing rational about forcing your daughter to marry someone she doesn't love." Victor's hands settled on my shoulders, warm and steady. "Listen to me. They're going to try to make you feel guilty, ashamed. They're going to tell you that you've humiliated the family, destroyed David's reputation, thrown away your future. Don't listen to them." The knocking intensified, followed by David's voice, plaintive and wounded. "Elena, please, can work. Through this, whatever's wrong, we can fix it." "I'm not broken," I said, more to myself than to Victor. "I don't need to be fixed." "No," he agreed, his thumb tracing along my jaw. "You don't." But even as he said it, I could see the conflict in his eyes. The part of him that wondered if they were right, if I was making a mistake that would destroy us both. The front door burst open. My father stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, his silver hair disheveled, his usually perfect suit wrinkled from the drive. Behind him, David looked pale and shaken, while the lawyers flanked them with briefcases and grim expressions. "Enough of this nonsense," my father said, his eyes fixed on me, with the same disappointed look I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Elena, get your things. We're leaving." "No." The word came out stronger than I expected, steadier. "I'm not going anywhere." His gaze shifted to Victor, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I should have known." "Haven't. You done enough damage to this family?" "Haven't done anything," Victor replied calmly. "Elena made her own choice." "Choice?" My father laughed, sharp and bitter. "A 19-year-old girl doesn't run away from her wedding and end up here by choice. Not unless someone's been filling her head with romantic nonsense and taking advantage of her emotional state." "I'm 24, I said through gritted teeth, "and I'm standing right here. If you want to discuss my choices, discuss them with me." But he kept talking to Victor as if I was invisible, as if I was a child to be managed, rather than a woman capable of making her own decisions. "You want her? Fine. But understand what you're taking on. Elena has been sheltered her entire life. She's never worked a day, never faced real consequences. She's beautiful and sweet, but she's not equipped for the real world. She'll be completely dependent on you. And when the novelty wears off, when she realizes what she's given up, she'll resent you for it." Each word hit me like a physical blow. This was how he saw me, how they all saw me. A pretty ornament to be passed from father to husband, incapable of independence or genuine feeling. "Stop," I whispered, but nobody heard me. David stepped forward, his face earnest and pained. "Elena, I know you're scared. Marriage is a big step, and maybe we move too fast. But what we have is real. It's stable. It's built on friendship and compatibility, not just passion that will burn out." "Stop," I said louder. "You'll get tired of playing house," my father continued to Victor, "and she'll get tired of being poor. Because that's what this is, isn't it? Some middle-class fantasy about love conquering all. Elena has never been without money, without security. She has no idea what she's throwing away. Stop. The word exploded out of me with such force that everyone fell silent. My whole body was shaking. 5 years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. Stop talking about me like I'm not here. Stop deciding what I want and what I need and what I'm capable of. I turned to my father, tears streaming down my face, but my voice steady. You want to know what I'm throwing away? I'm throwing away a life that was never mine, a husband I don't love, a future I never chose, a version of myself that exists, only to make other people comfortable. Elena, David started. I held up my hand. You're a good man, David. You deserve someone who loves you completely, someone who chooses you every day, not someone who settles for you because it's expected. His face crumpled and I felt a stab of guilt, but not regret. Never regret. Looked at the lawyers, at these men who thought they could bully me back into compliance. You can take your contracts and your family obligations and your talk about reputation and throw them in the river. I don't care about any of it. Finally, I turned to my father. The man who'd raised me, who'd given me everything except the right to choose my own path. I know you think you're protecting me, I said, my voice gentler now. But I don't need protection for my own choices. I need the freedom to make them. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of the woman I'd become despite all his efforts to keep me a child. If you walk away now, he said finally, don't expect to come crawling back when reality sets in. There are consequences to choices, Elena, and some doors once closed don't open again. The threat hung in the air between us. My trust fund, my family connections, my safety net. Everything I'd known and relied on, gone with a few words. I felt Victor tense beside me, felt him preparing to fight this battle for me. But this was mine to win or lose. Then I guess I'll have to make sure I don't need them to open, I said. My father's face went cold, carved from stone. Without another word, he turned and walked out, the lawyers trailing behind him like shadows. David lingered, his eyes searching my face for some sign that I'd changed my mind. I hope you're right. About this, he said quietly. I hope he's worth everything you're giving up. Then he was gone too, leaving Victor and me alone in the sudden silence. I sank onto the couch, my legs finally giving out. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me hollow and shaky. Okay? Victor asked, sitting beside me but not touching, as if he wasn't sure he had the right anymore. I don't know, I admitted. Ask me in a year. Or 10. He was quiet for a long moment. Your father wasn't entirely wrong, you know, about what you're giving up. The security, the comfort. I can't offer you the life you're used to. I turned to look at him, this man who'd risked everything to give me a choice. Do you want to know what my life was like? I asked. I woke up every morning in a bed that felt like a cage. Ate breakfast with people who planned my day for me, my week, my entire future. I wore clothes chosen by stylists, attended events planned by others, smiled and nodded, and agreed to things that made me feel like I was drowning. I reached for his hand, threading our fingers together. I don't need security, Victor. I need to feel alive. And with you, for the first time in my life, I do. But even as I said the words, even as I meant them completely, I couldn't shake the echo of my father's warning. Some doors once closed don't open again. I had just slammed the door on everything I'd ever known. The question was whether what waited on the other side would be worth it. 3 weeks passed like a dream I was afraid to wake from. Victor's house became my sanctuary. Every room a discovery of who I could be when no one was watching, when no one was expecting anything from me except the truth. I learned to make coffee, without servants, to read books chosen by curiosity instead of curriculum, to wear clothes that felt like my own skin. And I learned Victor, the way he hummed unconsciously while cooking breakfast. How he read 3 newspapers every morning, his brow furrowed as he absorbed the weight of the world. The careful way he touched me, like I might disappear if he held on too tight, but paradise has a way of revealing its cracks when you're not looking. I found the first one on a Tuesday, while Victor was in town handling business. I'd been exploring the house, claiming corners and cataloging the books on his shelves. When I discovered the room he'd never shown me, it was locked, but the key hung on a hook just beside the door, as if he wanted to keep secrets but couldn't quite commit to hiding them. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs. Pictures of me at 17 laughing at some family barbecue. At 18, dancing at my debutante ball. At 20, 21, 22. Newspaper clippings from charity events I'd attended. Social pages where my engagement to David had been announced. 5 years of my life, cataloged and preserved like specimens in a museum. My hands shook as I examined each image. Each carefully collected piece of evidence that Victor's obsession ran deeper than love, deeper than longing. This wasn't romance. This was surveillance. You weren't supposed to see. I spun around to find him in the doorway, his face pale, his usual composure finally cracked. 5 years, I whispered. You've been watching me for 5 years, Elena, you knew. The realization hit me like ice water. When you showed up at the chapel, it wasn't coincidence. You knew I was going to run. Stepped into the room, careful and slow, like approaching a wild animal. I hired someone to watch the wedding, to make sure you were safe, that you were happy. When my contact called and said you'd fled, you hired someone. My voice pitched higher, hysteria creeping in around the edges. To spy on me? To protect you? From what? From David? The words exploded out of him. Years of carefully controlled emotion finally breaking free. Did you think I didn't know what kind of man he really is? What his family is capable of? Stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. What are you talking about? Victor ran his hands through his hair, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. David's not the golden boy everyone thinks he is, Elena. His first wife, Catherine, the one who supposedly died in a car accident 3 years ago, she was planning to leave him. She'd confided in a friend about his temper, about how controlling he'd become.
Ow.
That's impossible. David would never. The accident happened the night before she was supposed to meet with a divorce lawyer. Dector's eyes were wild now, desperate for me to understand. The police report said she lost control on a curve, but the car was examined by a private investigator. The brake lines had been tampered with. My legs gave out, and I sank into the chair by the window. You're lying. I wish I was. He knelt beside me, his hands hovering just above my knees, but not quite touching. Why do you think your father was so eager for this marriage? The Carlyle family has been laundering money through their shipping business for decades. Your father's banks have been facilitating it, and when the federal investigation started getting close, they needed to bind their families together legally. Spousal privilege. You can't be forced to testify against your husband. The room spun around me. Every certainty I'd clung to was crumbling, revealing a foundation built on lies and violence. So you're what, my knight in shining armor? I laughed, sharp and bitter. You've been stalking me for 5 years, collecting pictures like trophies, and I'm supposed to be grateful? His face flinched like I'd slapped him. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Victor? Explain it to me, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I traded one cage for another. At least David was honest about wanting to own me. I love you. The words came out broken, pleading. Everything I did because I love you. Love. I stood up, fury giving me strength. Love doesn't spy on people. Love doesn't manipulate and orchestrate and collect evidence like some obsessed detective. Love trusts. Love gives freedom. Love lets the other person choose. You did choose, he said desperately. You got in my car. You came here willingly, because I thought I was choosing you. I gestured at the walls covered with my stolen moments. But this isn't you, Victor. This is an obsession. 5-year fantasy about a girl who doesn't even exist anymore. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of collapsed dreams. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, the air thick, with the promise of rain. You're right, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I let it go too far. I let my need to protect you become something sick, something wrong. But Elena, everything I told you about David, about your father, it's all true. If you go back to them now, I'm not going back to them. I moved toward the door, my decision crystallizing with each step. But I'm not staying here either. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not running toward someone or away from someone. When I'm just me, where will you go? I paused at the threshold, looking back at this man I'd loved, this stranger I'd thought I knew. I don't know, I admitted. But that's the point, isn't it? For the first time in my life, I get to figure it out myself. Okay, an hour later, I was packed and waiting. By the front door, when Victor's phone rang, he answered it in the kitchen, his voice too low for me to hear the words, but I caught the tension in his tone. When he returned, his face was grave. "That was my contact at the police station," he said. "David filed a missing persons report. He's claiming you're mentally unstable, that I kidnapped you during a psychological break." My blood ran cold. Can he do that? Is your father's connections? With the right lawyers and doctors willing to testify about your fragile mental state? Victor's jaw tightened. They can make it stick long enough to have you committed for observation. It's long enough to break you down and convince everyone you need to be protected from your own decisions. The walls felt like they were closing in. Even now, even after everything, the cage was still there, waiting to snap shut around me. "So what do you suggest?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Victor looked at me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke, his voice was different, clearer, more honest than it had been since I'd arrived. "I suggest you disappear," he said. "Really disappear. New name, new life, somewhere they'll never think to look. And you, I'll stay here. Let them focus their attention on me while you get away." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. "There's a cabin in the mountains, 3 hours north. It's not in my name, not traceable. Stay there tonight, then decide what comes next." I stared at the keys, silver and ordinary, and somehow representing more freedom than I'd ever possessed. "Why would you help me after what I said?"
"'Cause you."
"We're right." His smile was sad, but genuine.
Oh,
Love gives freedom.
maybe.
And maybe it's time I learned the difference between loving someone and needing to possess them. Thunder rumbled overhead as I walked to the car, Victor's final gift to me. As I drove away from his house, from the sanctuary that had become another kind of prison, I caught sight of him in the rearview mirror. He was standing on the porch, hands shoved in his pockets, watching me leave. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the admission of his own flaws. But also, perhaps, more human. The rain started just as I reached the main road. Fat drops spattering the windshield like tears. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. No father dictating my choices, no fiancé planning my future, no obsessed lover cataloging my every move. Just me, a car, and an open road leading toward whatever came next. It was terrifying. It was perfect. The cabin clung to the mountainside like a secret, accessible only by a winding dirt road that disappeared into thick stands of pine and oak. I arrived as the last light was dying, the sky painted in shades of purple and gold that made the world look like something from a dream. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace, a small kitchen, bookshelves lined with mysteries and philosophy texts that clearly belonged to someone else's abandoned life. I built a fire more for comfort than warmth, and sat cross-legged on the worn rug, trying to process. Everything that had happened 3 days ago, I'd been a runaway bride seeking sanctuary. Tonight, I was a woman with no name, no history, no connections to tie me to the life I'd left behind. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "He came looking for you an hour after you left. Told them you'd never been here. Take care of yourself, Elena. You deserve to be happy." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it and turned the phone off. Victor was part of my past now, along with David and my father and everyone else who thought they knew what was best for me. The future was a blank page. And for the first time in my life, I got to write it myself. 1 month later, I was living in a small apartment in Asheville, working at a bookstore that smelled like coffee and old paper and possibility. I'd chosen the name Sarah Collins, simple and forgettable, and built a quiet life around small pleasures, morning walks through the mountains, Books read for joy instead of education. Conversations with strangers who knew nothing about my family or my past. I was learning who I was when. I wasn't performing a role for someone else's benefit. The answer surprised me. I was stronger than I'd thought, more resilient. I'd been so afraid of being alone, of being without the safety net of family money and connections, but I discovered I could survive just fine on my own. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living instead of just existing. I also learned that I had a talent for seeing through people's facades, probably developed from years of navigating my father's world of polite lies and hidden agendas. It made me good at my job, good at recommending the right book to the right person, good at spotting the customers who needed someone to listen more than someone to sell them something, like the woman who came in every Tuesday. Always browsing the self-help section, but never buying anything. I finally approached her with a cup of tea and a romance. It's a novel about a woman who rebuilt her life after leaving an abusive marriage. Sometimes I said gently, we need to believe in happy endings before we can create our own. She broke down crying right there in the poetry section, and I held her while she sobbed about the husband who controlled every aspect of her life, who monitored her bank account and her phone calls and her friendships until she felt like she was disappearing. I gave her the number for a women's shelter, slipped her $200 in cash, money I'd saved from my bookstore wages, told her that freedom was worth any price she had to pay for it. A week later, she stopped by to tell me she'd left him. How did you know? She asked. 'Cause I used to be you, I said simply, just in a prettier cage. That night, I sat on my tiny balcony overlooking the mountains and thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. The scared, suffocated girl who'd run from her own wedding because she couldn't imagine any other escape. She felt like a stranger now. My phone rang, startling me from my reverie. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't seen in months. "Hello?" "Marcus," I said, answering on the third ring. My brother's voice was careful, controlled. "Elena, I've been looking for you. I know. I'd been expecting this call eventually." Marcus was nothing if not persistent. "How did you find me? Used your social security number to get the apartment? It just took time to trace. And now that you've found me, what do you want?" A long pause. "To apologize that I hadn't expected." "For what?" "For not protecting you. For letting Father and David railroad you into that marriage. For being so caught up in my own life that I didn't see how miserable you were." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache of old wounds. Couldn't have stopped it, Marcus. I had to save myself. "Maybe, but I should have tried." His voice cracked slightly. "Should have been the brother you deserved instead of father's." "Loyal soldier? What happened after I left?" "Chaos. Father tried to spin it as a medical emergency, claimed you'd had a breakdown. David played the wounded hero for about a week, then quietly started dating his secretary. The engagement was officially called off due to irreconcilable differences." I laughed, short and bitter. "How civilized of them. Elena, there's something else." "About Victor." My chest tightened. "What about him?" "He's been under federal investigation. Everything he told you about David and Father, about the money laundering, it was all true. Victor had been feeding information to the FBI for months before your wedding." Oh, that's how he knew so much. The world tilted beneath me. "He was working with the FBI? As an informant, yes. His company did business with Father's bank, gave him access to records. When he realized what was happening, he went to the authorities." I sat in stunned silence, processing this revelation. Victor hadn't just been obsessively watching me. He'd been trying to protect me from something real, something dangerous. "The investigation wrapped up last month," Marcus continued. "Father's been indicted on racketeering charges. David's fled the country. The whole empire is crumbling. And Victor, clean, completely clean. In fact, he's something of a hero to the prosecutors. His testimony is going to put a lot of bad people in prison." I stared out at the mountains, thinking about the man I'd left behind. The man I'd accused of being obsessed and controlling. He'd been trying to save me, and I'd thrown it back in his face. "Where is he now?" I asked quietly. "I don't know." disappeared after the indictments came down. Some people think he's in witness protection, but I suspect he just wanted to start over somewhere new, like someone else I know. We talked for another hour, Marcus filling me in on the destruction of our father's world. The family friends who turned out to be criminals, the life I'd escaped just in time. When we finally hung up, he promised to visit soon, and for the first time in years. I believed we might actually be able to have a real relationship, but it was Victor who dominated my thoughts as I tried to sleep that night. Victor, who'd loved me enough to spend 5 years trying to protect me from dangers I didn't even know existed, who'd been willing to let me hate him rather than explain himself and compromise an ongoing federal investigation, who'd given me the keys to freedom even when I'd accused him of trying to cage me. 3 days later, I was working the morning shift. When a familiar figure appeared in the philosophy section, he looked different. Thinner, his hair longer, and touched with silver at the temples. There were new lines around his eyes, evidence of stress and sleepless nights. But when our eyes met, across the store, the connection was instant and electric, just like it had always been. "Elena," he said simply. "It's Sarah now," I replied, though my voice shook slightly. He nodded, accepting this. "Sarah, I like it. It suits you." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd hurt each other trying to figure out how to navigate the space between love and regret. "Marcus told me about the investigation," I said finally. "What?" "About what you were really doing." "I couldn't tell you. If the case had been compromised, I know." I stepped closer, studying his face. "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't. Everything you said was true. I did become obsessed. I did let my need to protect you turn into something unhealthy. The fact that I had good reasons doesn't excuse the way I handled it." A customer approached with a question about local hiking guides, and I helped them while Victor browsed quietly nearby. When we were alone again, he was holding a book of poetry, running his fingers along the spine. "How did you find me?" "I didn't. I moved here 3 months ago, bought a little place up in the mountains. I've been coming to this bookstore every few days," hoping. He shrugged. "I guess I was hoping the universe would be kind enough to let our paths cross again, and if they hadn't, then I would have accepted that some things aren't meant to be healed, that some people are better off apart even when they love each other." The honesty in his voice broke something open inside me. This wasn't the controlling man who'd covered his walls with my photographs. This was someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that real love means being willing to let go. "I get off work at 6, I heard myself say. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "Sarah, I don't want you to feel pressured. If you're happy here, if you've built a life—" "I have built a life," I interrupted. "A good one. I'm not the scared girl who ran from her wedding anymore. I know who I am now, what I want, what I won't tolerate. And what do you want?" I looked at this man who'd waited 3 months for the chance to see me again, who'd learned to love me enough to let me go, who'd risked everything to keep me safe from dangers I'd never even known existed. "I want to have dinner with an old friend," I said carefully. "See if two people who've both learned how to be alone can figure out how to be together." His smile was slow and genuine, transforming his face. "I'd like that very much." Evening, we walked through downtown Asheville as the sun set behind the mountains, talking about books and music and the small discoveries of daily life. He told me about the woodworking shop he'd opened, about finding peace in creating something beautiful with his hands. I told him about the bookstore, about the customers who'd become friends, about the woman I was becoming when no one was watching. We were different people than we'd been 6 months ago, scarred by our mistakes, humbled by our failures, but also stronger, more honest, more aware of what we'd lost and what we'd found. "I have a confession," Victor said as we stopped beside the French Broad River, watching the water catch the last light of day. "What's that?" "I still have some of those photographs." "Not the wall of obsession," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just a few. The one from your 18th birthday party, where you're laughing at something your cousin said. The one from the charity gala, where you look so beautiful it takes my breath away." I waited for the anger, the sense of violation. Instead, I found myself curious. "Why those ones?" "'Cause they show who you really are. It's not the perfect daughter or the obedient fiancé, but Elena, The woman who lights up a room just by being herself. The woman I fell in love with. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small photograph, edges worn from handling. It was me at 19, reading under an oak tree at some family gathering, completely absorbed in my book, unaware I was being photographed. "This is my favorite," he said softly, "'cause you look free." I took the photo, studying the girl I'd been. She did look free in that moment. Lost in a story, existing purely for her own pleasure. "You can keep it," I said, handing it back. "But I want you to remember something every time you look at it." "What's that?" "That loving someone means trusting them to write their own story, even if you're not sure you'll have a place in it." He nodded, tucking the photograph carefully back into his wallet. "I'm learning that. It's harder than I thought it would be. The best things usually are." We walked back toward my apartment as the stars appeared, bright and clear in the mountain air. At my door, Victor hesitated. I see you again?" he asked. "Maybe," I said, and saw him flinch slightly at the uncertainty. "I need to be sure this time, Victor. Not just of what I feel, but of who we are together. Of whether we can build something healthy instead of just intense. I understand. Give me 2 weeks. Let me think about this. Really think about it. Without the pressure of you waiting for an answer." He nodded, though I could see it cost him. The old Victor would have pushed, would have tried to convince me, would have found ways to stay close and influence my decision. This Victor simply said, 2 weeks. "And then whatever you decide, I'll respect it." He started to leave then. Turned back. "Sarah, for what it's worth, I think you're extraordinary. Not because of who you used to be or what you came from, but because of who you've become. This woman you've built from scratch, she's incredible. Whoever gets to share her life is going to be the luckiest person in the world." 2 weeks later, I found him at his woodworking shop, sanding a beautiful oak table that gleamed like honey in the afternoon light. He looked up when I entered, hope and fear warring in his expression. "I've been thinking," I said, "and I think to people who've learned how to be whole on their own, might just be able to build something extraordinary together." His face broke into a grin that was pure joy, unguarded and beautiful. But he didn't move toward me, didn't assume, "Are you sure?" I asked. Instead of answering with words, I crossed the workshop and kissed him. Not with desperation or need, but with choice. With the clear-eyed certainty of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and why. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I rested my forehead against his. "I'm sure," I whispered. "But we do this right this time. Slow, honest, equal, no more secrets, no more rescuing. Just 2 people choosing each other every day." "Every day," he agreed. Outside, the mountains stretched toward the horizon, ancient and patient and wise. Inside the workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood shavings and the tools of creation, we began to build something new. Not a fairy tale. Not a rescue story. Just love in all its messy, complicated, beautiful reality. It was everything I'd never known I wanted. It was perfect. The end.